Shin Yu is a poet, cross-media artist, and curator for the collaborative global exploration project Atlas Obscura. Her poetic origins inform an artistic style that has grown beyond the written word, manifesting in photography, installation, and public art, cross-disciplinary collaborations, and sound. She encourages us to reflect upon the essential questions of our own lives and to explore how we see that interrogation expressed or mirrored around us. Please join me in giving a warm town hall welcome to Shin Yu Pai.
Good evening, everyone. Peter Levitt was born in New York City in 1946. His Zen practice began in the late 60s in San Francisco, and he received lay entrustment from teacher Zoketsu Norman Fischer and is authorized to teach in the lineage of Shunryu Suzuki-Roshi, a Zen master who is widely credited for establishing Zen in the West and who also established the San Francisco Zen Center. Peter is a founder and guiding teacher of the Salt Spring Zen Circle on Salt Spring Island, British Columbia. He edited Thich Nhat Hanh's classic, The Heart of Understanding, and also served as associate and translation editor of Treasury of the True Dharma Eye, Zen Master Dogen Shobo Genzo, which is edited by Kazuaki Tanahashi. With Tanahashi, Peter has also co-edited The Essential Dogen, Writings of the Great Zen Master, and co-translated A Flock of Fools, Ancient Buddhist Tales of Wisdom and Laughter from the 100 Parable Sutra. Peter's 10 poetry books include Within Within, 100 Butterflies, and Bright Root, Dark Root. In addition, he published Fingerpainting on the Moon, Writing and Creativity as a Path to Freedom, which is a book on creativity that easily rivals and eclipses Natalie Goldberg or Julia Cameron's books on creativity. His publishing career includes fiction, journalism, and literary translations from Chinese, Japanese, and Spanish. And in 1989, Peter received the prestigious Lannan Foundation Award in poetry. We're so very honored tonight for this opportunity to converse with Peter and to listen to the sacred wisdom of his poems, which legendary Black Mountain poet Robert Creeley once described as sounding the honor of our common dance. Peter will be joined mid-presentation during his talk tonight by community member Peggy Liao, who will be reading the Chinese source text of Peter's Hanshan translations. Please welcome Peter Levitt.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay at the back? Yeah? It's really, really great to see all of you. I tend to spend most of my time alone. I don't see that many people. I live on an island, rural situation. My wife recently told me that it wasn't so good. I should see more people. So now I can tell her that my social calendar is filled for the next 5 years. So thank you for helping me out. I want to, I need to get the time thing happening here. I want to thank Shin Yu and everybody who made it possible for me to come down here from Canada to spend the evening with you. It's really a great honor, and Shin Yu is such a wonderful artist and poet also, so that I feel really grateful to her for bringing me down. I'm going to start with a poem that I can't quite remember when I translated it from the Spanish, but it's decades ago. But it's a poem that I love, and I love to begin readings with it because it sort of sets the stage, so to speak. And it's by the Spanish poet Juan Ramón Jiménez, who is very famous, a very wonderful lyric poet from Spain. And the name of the poem in Spanish is Inteligencia Dame. So when I say intelligentsia, what word do you hear in English? Intelligence, right, yeah. So I translate it as mind, because this poem is really kind of a prayer. And intelligence is something that's a word that we closely associate with the intellect. But what Jimenez is speaking to is way beyond just the intellect. It's something larger than that. And something that in Zen is maybe called big mind. And to give you an idea of what that might be, there was a poet in Tang Dynasty China named Wang Wei. You may have heard of Wang Wei. And Wang Wei had a collection called Hiding the Universe. And so the question was asked, where do you hide the universe? So where would you hide the universe? In your pocket. All right, advanced student. Very good. The answer that was given was you hide the universe in the universe because it's the only place big enough for it to fit. So this is what big mind is like. So I'll read to you first the Spanish and then I'll give you the translation. And this is really kind of like a prayer that I think in one way or another most poets and artists, and maybe in each of your own way, you may feel yourself. Inteligencia dame. Inteligencia dame el nombre exacto de las cosas. Que mi palabra sea la cosa misma creada por mi alma nuevamente. Que por mí vayan todos los que no las conocen a las cosas. Que por mí vayan todos los que ya las olvidan a las cosas. Que por mí vayan todos los mismos que las aman a las cosas. Inteligencia, dame el nombre exacto, y tuyo, y suyo, y mío, de las cosas. Mind, give me. Mind, give me the exact name of things, that my word may be the thing itself, reinvented by my soul, so that all who do not know them go through me to things. All who have forgotten go through me to things. All those who love them go through me to things. Mind, give me the exact name, and yours, and theirs, and mine, of things. It's a beautiful poem, isn't it? And I love that, and yours, and theirs, and mine, of things, because it means that Jimenez really did know that each of us, in our own way, know how to touch the true life of each thing in the world, and we each have our own way of expressing it. So it's a poem of great confidence by Jimenez. I want to also bring another language into the reading, and I want to read 4 poems by Han Shan. Han Shan was a poet from the Tang Dynasty, like Wang Wei, and he's probably the most famous legendary hermit poet from the Tang Dynasty period. It's sort of funny to say a legendary hermit, but his poems were so famous and so well loved and have been that he's really quite well known. And I had the great honor with Kazuaki Tanahashi, with whom I was translating a Dogen from 13th century Japanese. We've just completed, and today we were told that Shambhala will be bringing out the most complete edition of Han Shan's poetry in the English language in June. We spent the last 2.5 years translating 315 poems of Han Shan's. So tonight, I'll read 4 of them. And Han Shan felt by the age of 30 he had it. And so he decided to leave what he called the dusty world behind him. And he wanted to spend some uninterrupted time with his own heart and mind in the natural world, so he could really come to terms with what his life was. And many of you may have had that inclination from time to time. It's not so easy to do. He wanted to, in one poem he says, it put an end to useless mixed up thinking. That's what he said. But it didn't stop him from caring, as the book that we did will show. His name, Han Shan, means cold mountain. Han is cold and Shan is mountain in the characters that he used. And he took the name of the mountain as his name, and it was a way of saying who I am and where I am and what I am, and my heart and mind are just one thing. There's no separation in any part of my life. So this was one of the great things about it. Han Shan. And Peggy Liao, graciously, thank you, will, excuse me, we'll read the Chinese, one poem at a time, and then I'll read the translation. So, Peggy, would you, we'll start with poem 1. And let me just interrupt. So remember, when he's talking about Cold Mountain, he's not only talking about a place with trees. He's talking about the entirety of his life, his mind, and his being. Yeah.
人问寒山道，寒山路不通。夏天冰未逝， 日出雾朦胧。似我何由界，与君心不同。君心若似我，还得到其中。
Thank you. We're listening to Chinese from 1200 years ago. You ask the way to Cold Mountain, but the road does not go through. In summer, the ice is not yet melted. The morning sun remains hidden in mist. How can you get here like I did? Our minds are not the same. When your mind becomes like mine, you will get here too. When he says your mind becomes like mine, he doesn't mean your mind becomes Cold Mountain. He means when your mind becomes the totality of what you are, when your life becomes the totality of what you are, you will get here too. It's a very loving statement for us. Let's do the next, number 5.
可笑寒山道，而无车马踪。怜惜难记取，叠嶂不知虫。气露千般草，迎风一样松。此时迷境处，行问影何从？
Go ahead, make fun of the way to Cold Mountain where there's not a trace of horse or cart. It's hard to remember valley switchbacks below layer upon layer of so many peaks. Dew weeps on 1,000 kinds of grasses. Winds sing through the pine. Lost now on my path, shadow, tell me, which way should I go? So it may not be so easy to be a hermit in the mountains. Yeah.
富而会高堂，华灯何为黄。此时无主者，心愿处其旁。不意遭排遣，还归暗促长。一人名俱损，顿亚习余光。
Thank you. So you hear the beginning of the shadow creeping into his perfect life beyond the dusty world. He never stopped caring about people. Rich people meet at a tall building decorated with shining lamps. When a woman without even a candle wants to draw near, they quickly push her away back into the shadows. How does adding someone diminish the light? I wonder, can't they spare it? We might ask that question today, don't you think? Yeah. Please, Peggy.
目见天台顶，孤高出众群。风摇松竹韵，月现海潮平。下望青山际，潭悬有白云。野情遍山水，本质木道轮。
He lived on Mount Tiantai. Thank you, Peggy. I see Tiantai Peak solitary above the entire range. Pines sway in the wind, bamboo stalks rustle, the moon appears, tides flow out and in. Scanning the green slopes below, I discuss the profound principle with the white cloud. Though the feeling of the wild is in mountains and waters, truly, I long for a companion of the way. He was so naked in his heart and so completely open about it. So, as I mentioned, I live on an island in Canada, and pretty rural. I live on Cushion Lake, and I, like it says in the Zen text, I chop wood and carry water. I actually chop my own wood, which is good. Keeps me, even in my 70s, I can still get the job done. This first poem is called Pale Shadow, and it's a pretty accurate description of how I walk through the world at this point in my life and how I see what I see. Pale Shadow. I rise early and walk to where light enters the forest and silence, tentative as a new lover, my hands leading me branch by branch on the uneven path. Overhead, the powerful stroke of wings through air causes me to stop. A sound like feathered oars as the morning hunt begins. I can just make out the direction before the soft whirring disappears. 2 summers past, my wife looked on as an eagle dove without warning into a flock of ducks floating lazily near the marsh at Cushion Lake. The force of the attack plunged the predator beneath the surface as she watched from shore. Then the eagle lifted its huge form above the water, shook and tried to rise, its claws clutching prey. There was no way it could lift off, she told me. The killer and killed had become one body, and the weight wed them where they were. Finally, the eagle began to row. He arched his great wings forward into the lake and pulled against death's enormous weight until he reached the shallows where water lilies tangle among fallen limbs. Then he dragged his prey into the soft grass to hide among the reeds, his shadow on the water, the last thing my wife could see. There is a silence that surrounds this world of shadow and light, an unmoving invisibility that clarifies each thing as it is beside the next, a membrane that shapes the detail one by one. It is how it all conjoins. I walk in the woods beside the river that rolls its soft tongue among stones night and day. It is not words that guide me, not life or death or change or anything I can name. It is the stillness before any name is given and the stillness just after. The unseen body that lives in the space between trees or flows beneath the earth's green water. I hold the image of the eagle's kill no different from the first time I saw my children bathed in the birthing blood that helped to keep them alive. All words, all that die or kill and struggle to survive are pale shadows, transparencies that return to their source at such a time. The unmoving ground beneath the ground where we stagger or we stride. I'm, like many of you, I'm sure, concerned about what's happening down, as we say, down here in the States and around the world. It's a very concerning situation for all of us. And sometimes the weight of it, like many of you, I'm sure, it just feels too heavy, and it causes me to stagger. Maybe I stagger in my heart. Maybe I just can't lift my head in the morning. It's difficult, I have to admit. But I find a way to do it. And just like it said, sometimes I stagger and sometimes I stride. Sometimes I have technological problems. So I want to read a poem dedicated to Federico Garcia Lorca, the great Spanish poet. Lorca loved his nation. He loved his people. He had a great passion for them. He loved the freedom he found in his Spanish culture. And he loved how many ways there were for the people to express that love and the joy of their life. And unfortunately, in the 1930s, the fascist government of Spain found that Lorca's poetry and his love and his global big mind was dangerous. And so, as you may know, he was assassinated by the Guardia Civil, the civil guard, killed this young poet at the age of 38. It's a great loss for him, of course, but also for humanity. So this is a poem dedicated to Lorca. The Guadalquivir that I'll mention is the name of a river. It's called Flamenco Blood and Song. Rodrigo plays. I begin to pace the floor. A torrent of rain pours out of the mouth of the guitar. A tower of bones, drenched fingers, shattered spines, hips and breasts that danced in the nightclubs of Seville, making love with the music of their poets, while the crickets of summer called to them, lured them outside to loosen their clothes and lie down in the shadows together, or sing until a bloodless dawn rose over the Guadalquivir. Then the bombings came, and the Guardia Civil. We live in history, even if it does not live in us. Even if we are blind to the hyenas whose voices cut families in half until the unknown graves of the disappeared hear a proper weeping, always too late. Green. Green is the poet's eyes that loved green, the grass that covers him. Silver. Silver is the earrings his mother dangled over his cradle as she soothed him with songs he would never forget. Black. Black is the uniforms, the coffin's tight room. Black is the blood that spilled when the executioner's bullets tore into his throat so he would sing no more. Black is that. Sun drenches the towers of Cordova. It is a new century now. The assassins have moved on to silence other songs. Do we hear them? Will we break off from the constant noise long enough to see their savage smiles slicing the air? Poets cannot afford to miss this spectacle. Women and men whose heads bend over their labors must not forget to look up. The uniforms are not cartoons, easy to spot in a crowd. Look closely. Listen to the air that spirals and whines like a bomb, the dust that explodes and settles with new bone. No one is innocent in a terrible time. Every voice given comes with a demand. I rise long before dawn, unable to sleep again. There is a pain in me that is not my pain alone, a sanctuary built of other men, other mothers who pace the night floor plotting to keep children alive. I speak with them by staring into the dark, by holding the ruined limbs of their young in my imagination like talismans to keep them from dying. It isn't enough. It isn't hardly enough. The air is too warm. The rain in this northern province falls heavily like chunks of flesh torn from the sky. It batters the ground. Reports from the south speak of flooding, fires, drownings, burning, rain, ruin. I cannot keep out of my ears the voice of a man I saw carrying a sign. All wars are the same war. Ask the weather. Federico, I come back to you again. Poem after poem dedicated to your sacrifice. Night after night, even after all these years, I sing the promise of love you gave. Child of the unlikely light of stars, boy-like lover of women and men who sang the ache and joy beneath the rustle of their clothing, the business is still unfinished. I have no certainty to offer. Only the trembling of an aging man who is either so blind or fiercely so in love with the world, he has neither the time nor sense to tremble with fear. This poem is the title poem of this book, Within, Within. And it starts with an epigraph written in 1243 by a man named Eihei Dogen, who's considered the founder, or many people consider him the founder of, say, Soto Zen Buddhism. And it's a very subtle line that it begins with. The epigraph is, "Spring is within a plum twig, bearing the snow, cold." Spring is within a plum twig, bearing the snow, cold. Within, within. No one can say what this life is. Snow, spring, plum twig, and bearing. Each thing is cold, cold, cold. And cold, cold, cold is snow, spring, plum twig, and bearing. This is within, and this is what is within. Bearing sorrow in silence or holding our happiness for the world are just plum twigs bearing snow. Shouting joy at passing cars or whispering, "I'm going to kill myself," is the heat of petals in winter, the blossoming of snowdrops in spring. Don't try and don't quit. That's the best I can say. People who love you and people who need you and people you love and those you hate come to the same thing. No matter how you turn, you can never turn fast or far enough. There is no escaping the 10 directions or 10,000 things, even when you die. So take it easy. Have a Cuban cigar. Your shoulders are wide as the path is wide. Your heart as open as one blossom, 2 snowfalls, 3 bows to the east, and 4 kisses, 1 on each cheek. So, we should remember to laugh. This poem is called Ancestors at the Sizzling Szechuan Palace. I wrote it while I was enjoying a quiet meal in Vancouver when I was visiting there. And it has the name Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma was an Indian saint who's credited with bringing Buddhism from India to China. And the legend, and I'm certain this is a legend, is that he brought Buddhism from India to China by floating on a bamboo leaf and landing at across the Yangtze and ending up at Liang. And so you might say, gee, did he carry all those books? But no, he carried his mind, his understanding, his presence, and his being. And that's what Bodhidharma brought across. There's a very famous story that I'm just remembering now. The emperor asked to see Bodhidharma, and they asked Bodhidharma, would you see the emperor? And he said, yeah, of course. And the emperor said, I've done all these wonderful things for Buddhism. You know, I've had all these sutras translated, and I've built temples, and where's the merit in it? And Bodhidharma said, no merit. So the emperor was very upset. Said, oh, darn, where's my goodies? So the emperor asked Bodhidharma about the sacredness of things. Yeah. There's also the word bodhisattva in this. A bodhisattva is a being who is, as part of their awakening in Buddhism, vows to let everyone else be liberated first, to dedicate their lives to the freedom of all beings, and then they will go last. So that's bodhisattva. Ancestors at the sizzling Szechuan Palace. The restaurant is crowded, noisy. Steam clouds flee the kitchen heat, while outside the traffic river honks through the chair-prop door. I bury myself in a cup of coarse tea, a bowl of plain rice. But when I look up, it all comes clear. This is the heaven realm of bodhisattvas. One stands squeezed between chairs in the aisle and nurses her newborn beside the flashing Tsingtao sign. Another feeds her daughter fried string beans with chopsticks, one by one. Grandfather with thick ears is yelling to his wife, who leans closer, smiling, nodding, yes, yes, deaf to everything he and everyone else has to say. Boys with large grins tussle over the last spare rib. Shiny-haired girls kick each other under the table with their spanking new leather shoes. Wake up, they all say. Keep doing the best you can. And suddenly, a homeless man with a bright watermelon patch of skin over half his face and not a tooth in his mouth rushes in and scurries from table to table like a whirlwind that pats the children on their heads and laughs with his arms around the old folks like friends at a wedding before chasing himself out the door and leaving behind a breeze that blows all the way from the Yangtze at Liang right through this palace of human love and cools us with a joy rarely seen. Pretty soon, we settle into the chattering hum again as grandmother continues to nod and smile. But there is a quiet happiness at each table that wasn't here before. And beneath the hum, the sound of Bodhidharma's straw sandals can be heard as he steps from his floating leaf onto fertile Chinese soil. I want to... excuse me, that's the Chinese. This is the English, okay. I want to read a series of poems that were put together and turned into a book. An artist named Ian McKeever in the UK enjoyed these poems. There was one more, a translation by Neruda that I did that I won't read, and made lithographs to go with these poems. So this one's called The Measure. And these poems are really a celebration of just the ordinariness of our lives. And if we look at what ordinary really means, we might find something wonderful. Just like at the Sizzling Szechuan Palace. The measure. To take the measure of stone, give your hands full flesh to it. Feel with your skin, shape, heft, and size. Find that part of you where it lies, that field that discovers you there after all, most ancient conglomerate of space. And that other thing, what has grown in the heart, simply hard. Do not make it a crime. Make nothing other than it is, the breath in your mouth, full reach of the world. This poem is in autumn, and it's rooted in my absolute conviction and sense of ourselves as whole beings. I use the word Buddha in it. Buddha is a verb that means awakening, and Ha is a person. We think of Buddha like an object, right? It's Buddha. But actually, it's the continual process of waking up. So a person is always waking up. There is no final end where you get a gold star and hang it on your wall and show your friends. In autumn, sometimes seeing what is not there, other times not seeing what is. Our legs become tangled. Our hands can't stop wringing against themselves. Still, we live mid-stagger with pure hearts. Let no one's ignorance fool you. People do not become Buddhas. Buddhas do not become human life. Unborn and undying, like a torn leaf in an autumn shower. When was wholeness ever not whole? There's an important idea in it. We don't become Buddhas. We don't become awakened beings. We just simply become what we are. And when we become the wholeness of what we are, people call that by a name. Sometimes seeing what is not there. Other times not seeing what is. Our legs become tangled. Our hands can't stop wringing against themselves. Still, we live mid-stagger with pure hearts. Let no one's ignorance fool you. People do not become Buddhas. Buddhas do not become human life. Unborn and undying, like a torn leaf in an autumn shower. When was wholeness ever not whole? One first law. It is true. True even when photographing a still life, the slant of sun on the side of a building in Tangiers. If you do not approach things gently, they withdraw, pull into themselves, pull away. A shadow darkening into itself. A fingerprint on the back of a memorial photograph dissolving into the air. There is no inanimate nature, not as long as you yourself are alive. Lessons. One friend showed me how to cut an avocado with a sharp knife, so expertly it was like kissing a baby's skin. Then he scooped the green flesh with a spoon, and such love, it passed right into me. Another friend taught me to listen to the espresso pot on the stove so I could remove it from the fire just after it began to gurgle. Then she put it on a sideboard briefly until the boiling stopped. How slowly she poured it into a porcelain cup, like an alchemist pouring gold. A Zen teacher showed me how to fold paper softly, precisely, as if I was creating eyelids for the very first time. Now, I cannot fold paper without him. A former wife showed me how to wrap presents for birthdays or Christmas. It's the thing about her I remember most. My attempts were always laughable, and I'm still not good at it, lacking the talent. But I try. There's no reason to go on here. I could talk about loving and listening and being gentle, which my wife always shows me how to do. But I was just thinking while the coffee heated up. Nothing more. The thing is, I pretty much think of these people every time I do the thing they taught me. It's like getting a postcard. Remember those? Another small gesture that meant the world. This mortal world. I came. I was here a while. I passed through. He came. He was here a while. He passed through. She came. She was here a while. She passed through. They came. They were here a while. They passed through. We came. We were here a while. We passed through. Here a while came. It was here a while. It passed through. Passing through came. It was here a while. It passed through. It came. It was here a while. It passed through. I think, I don't really know where I am in the time. I think I'll read two poems, and then we'll see. This one is called In Grace. I want to move the reading toward just ordinary loving, which is so important for our lives, to express that in our lives. This is called In Grace for my wife Shirley. And Shirley is a poet and a potter and a musician, a gardener, takes great joy in each of those activities. She also works with children as a child psychologist and a psychologist. So she's a very busy person. In grace, the beans are sweet, abundant. You pluck them from the garden with desiring hands. Then your eyes carry them through the meadow to the house where you cut loose their caps and dance them into the waiting bowl, dreaming the Ukrainian music of your violin. It is a bowl you turned on the wheel until it spun itself into a shape you hoped would never stop turning. A bowl glazed with a trace of blue sky and the full lips of desire. How long has that bowl been waiting? How long must we wait with desire? Love arrives, or it is delayed, or it cannot stay long enough for the meal to reach an end. Meanwhile, the earth that flies will fill us at the last, fills us now with green, with rain, with the mineral song that weaves through eons without ending. And you, who long with a woman's longing for the good of her son, her husband, the poetry that pours through every moment of your living, you sit down beside us at the table. Place your hands quietly, briefly, in your lap. Then you lift them, palms together, like a tender flame each of us holds, and we bow. There's also a kind of grace, in a way, a deep appreciation in loving over a long period of time. And in this poem, there's an image that comes from a Jewish wedding ritual. Maybe you've seen it or done it or had done, where the bride and groom are lifted up in chairs, and each holds the edge of a handkerchief as part of the wedding ritual. It's actually the beginning of the mating ritual. No one really says that, but that is what it is. So that image shows up here in a different way. This poem was written during a period when I had 6 years of chronic nerve pain, so that I was in pain 24 hours a day, sleeping 3 hours a night for 6 years. It was a very hard period. But even in the midst of all that pain, something came to be understood. And it's like saying that spring is within the plum branch, which bears the snow cold. Beside. For the moment, the sea lies easy beside the land. Sometimes an unseen question curls inside a fist this way, or lovers sleep on their backs, barely touching, naked in so many ways. It isn't only the young who know such ease. There are times an aging woman or man lies in bed, gazing through the long hours, calm, no longer troubled by the day. Such times grow like a slow garden, out of season. Unpredictable, they come on their own, arriving when all seemed otherwise. Only a fool would turn away the grace of sleepless patience and wonder. The house is quiet now, spacious as a mind at rest. The almost blue night air fills with the sound of steady breathing as the flame of my mother's memorial candle appears in the dark and grows still. "Where are you?" my father called in a dream I had just after he died. I could hear his voice come through from the floor above. It wasn't long before she let go to be with him, she said, faithful even past what she felt would be the end. Now I can see them, each holding one edge of death's handkerchief as they're lifted by their families and friends and dance together in the air past endings. We're not here to prove or disprove, not here to instruct our senses or correct what we've been given as ourselves. With luck, life brings us finally past any purpose or intention to the moment it provides. Tonight, after a winter of great pain, a sleepless winter where all purposes were forcibly abandoned, now is such a time. The image of my mother's flame disappears, and I am left only with the blueness of the air. Beside me, my wife murmurs and turns, her eyes following what I can't see, though I detect the scent of fresh cut wheat in her calm exhale. I can make no sense of what she says. She is wed to her own still night as surely as we were years before. And yet my solitude shows me the body of night, like the body of the woman I love, not only surrounds, but lies already within, like a beginningless vow that binds us each to each, past dreaming, past death, or any ending we perceive. To know it is finally to believe. And maybe I'll read a short kind of page and a half prose piece to you, because that's long-time love. This is something I witnessed more than 50 years ago. The dinner, and as a young man thinking, oh, what is love exactly? No one seems to be able to tell me. The dinner. All through the evening meal, the couple argued. He was right, then she was right, then he insisted, and she insisted. It was enough to make you sick. As the young man sat at the table with the other dinner guests, all of whom watched this display without speaking, he began to feel that maybe these two were enacting some sort of love ritual, one that only the two of them could understand. From the looks on their faces, he was certain that no one else at the table understood it at all. Finally, the meal was over, and one by one, rather than continue the evening as planned, the other guests made their excuses. The couple did their best to express regrets that their guests had to leave so soon after the meal, but their hearts were not in it. Their eyes and voices were dull, perfunctory, compared to the fire they'd had for each other earlier on. The young man watched all of this carefully and felt sure that as soon as everyone had taken their leave, they would start up again, and who knows where it would lead. Could people really make love after such a display of hatred and disrespect? When it was his turn to leave, he made his exit with a minimum of conversation. The snow was blowing sharply as he made his way through the streets to his lodging. As a poor student, he couldn't even afford a streetcar, and so he walked the mile home hunched in his thin coat against the snow. Once inside his room, he removed his cap, coat, gloves, and shoes, which he placed outside the door to his room in the hallway. No reason to dampen his socks on a wet floor should he need to use the toilet in the middle of the night. He opened his collared shirt at the throat, and then, following an impulse, went to the far wall, pulled up the bottom half of the double-hung window, and stuck his head out into the snow. A street lamp from below gave the scene an unreal yellow glow, and it was in that light that the snow seemed to blow around like spirits. What a night, the young man thought, but he did not withdraw his head from outside. He found a curious pleasure in feeling the bare skin of his face assaulted by the bitter cold while standing with his stockinged feet beneath the radiator. Somewhere, he knew, there was a girl who would care as much for him as the couple had cared for each other. And when he met her, he vowed that he would never agree to a thing she had to say. Thank you very much. Hi, Shin Yu.
Which chair would you like?
Chair?
Do you have a preference?
I'll sit over there.
Okay.
Is it okay?
Yeah, of course.
Yes, thank you. Oh, we get big glasses. Okay. I guess this is the big part, hey? Thank you so much for being such an attentive audience. Appreciate it.
So I thought I'd just dive in. Your poems are this profound appreciation and container of a fully lived life, and I would love to understand more of how Zen practice has shaped your perspective and your approach to poem making.
That's a good question. Many people have an image of Zen practice. They see people sitting straight up like blocks of wood facing a wall. Looks very uncomfortable. It can be very uncomfortable. My first writing mentor was a woman named Kay Boyle. Kay was a poet, a short story writer, and novelist, winner of the O. Henry Award several times, etc. And she was in Paris at the time with Hemingway and Fitzgerald, and Samuel Beckett was a good friend of hers. And she was 65 when we met, and I was 21. And she took me on as a mentor. And in one conversation, I mentioned to her about my interest in Zen. This is 1967, and she said, "I want you to stay away from Zen." I said, "Why, Kay?" It was like crumbling. She said, "You're a juicy boy. I don't want to think about you sitting like a stick of wood facing a wall." I said, "Well, it's too late." Because I had discovered that sitting quietly and still and allowing my mind or my feelings, whatever it was, to just pass through without controlling me and pulling me this way and that, something settled inside, and I was actually able to feel my life in a deeper way and a truer way than following all the thoughts and feelings all over the place. And so the secret of Zen, if I can say that, this sounds stupid beyond belief. Shunryu Suzuki said the secret words of Zen is not always so. Nothing is always so. But for me, the secret is that when we sit down quietly and when we allow ourselves to no longer be pulled here and there by thoughts and feelings, a presence seems to emerge that seems authentic. We can actually feel it in an intimate way. And that intimacy then becomes something, a quality of our being that you don't need the pillow to do it. Once you learn how to be with your mind in that way, you can then bring that intimacy to every encounter you have in the world. Whether it's a person or a stone or a cloud or a flower or a baby, whether it's pain or death. In that poem that I read about the time when I was in so much pain, it was because of the ability to be intimate in that moment, despite the pain, that I was able actually to find something else out about loving beside the woman that I love and appreciate so much. So that's how it goes together. Zen practice actually promotes intimacy. It promotes connection in a very deep and profound way, precisely because you're not jumping from one place to another, but you're staying right where you are. I'm a gardener. I love to garden, as does my wife. Any of you like to garden? Yeah. Did you ever notice that plants don't grow in one place on Wednesday and then jump somewhere else on Thursday? Say, "Oh, that's better over there." They actually stay where they are. onions know so much more than we do. It is really incredible. I mean, if any of you have leaping plants, let me know. But that's our mind. It's why Han Shan went off. The poet called Han Shan went off and became one with his environment because he was able to intimately know the world through that experience. And it ended up bringing him back out, not to live with other people, but with a heart that blossomed with love and compassion and care and affection for the people he thought he was leaving behind.
So speaking of Han Shan, so there's a tradition of monasticism in Zen Buddhism and the hermit who withdraws from the world. Mm-hmm. You're from a very different kind of lineage, one that is more of the householder tradition. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about this practice of Zen and being in the world.
Sure. I'm a householder. It means I have a wife, I have children, I have grandson, friends I see once in a while, dogs, cats, pay bills, have to earn a living. Because of Zen practice, it helps me to be present as much as I can with everything that I'm doing and not get caught up by the drama of daily life. I certainly feel all the feelings that everyone has. It's just that I know that they pass through, just like in this Mortal World poem that I read. My feeling is that for me, speaking just for me, we all are made possible by the total functioning of everything in the world. It's called interdependence now. Everything exists in me. I don't exist unless I'm also time or space. If I'm not water, clouds, rain, the minerals in the earth. I'm not here. You take any of those away, I cannot be here. Isn't that right? You cannot. So all of that exists right here inside of me. Why would I have some idea that I could go to some other place, away from the world? I am the whole world. I am the total functioning of the universe, and so is everything else in the world. This is really a basic Buddhist understanding. And so rather than have the idea that I should withdraw, I do my practice every day. And what I find is that it brings me closer to the world, just as it did with Han Shan. And that whatever I experience in myself gives me realization and understanding about what's going on with other people. So if I think someone else is stupid or dangerous, there's a good chance I recognize that because I've seen it already, very close to home. But because I've seen it in a quiet way, I have a different way of relating to it. So actually my practice as a householder helps me to try to do something to help the world. And I feel that when we sit like a dried stick, our heart opens, it flowers. And because it does, we can be of more use to the world, as opposed to thinking, I'm the one who knows and no one else does. That's pure delusion. And so my householder practice helps me take care of the world. In Dharma teaching that I offer to my students is take care of what's right in front of you. Right in front of you. What is it that right in front of me? What's right in front of me? Okay, maybe this problem. But it depends on how big my field of vision is. What's also right in front of me is racial inequality. What's also right in front of me is poverty. What's also right in front of me is child abuse. What's also right in front of me is women and children being sexually assaulted. That's right in front of me. Because of the practice, I don't want to back away from it. I want to go towards it and see if I can help. And that's what householder practice means to me.
So you didn't talk much about it in this particular lecture, but I know that you spent a significant time and energy exploring the Buddhist writings of the monk Dogen, with whom you share a sort of spiritual name, Eihei. I would love to hear some of the treasures of his teaching, and particularly if you could talk more about this idea of original wholeness, which you briefly spoke of.
Okay, so two things come to mind listening to you. One relates to what I've been saying. One of Dogen. So Dogen lived from 1200 to 1253 or 4, something like that, and was really a founder, as I said, of this orientation of Zen meditation. And probably the most famous quote of Dogen's is, "We study the self to forget the self." When we forget the self, and here's where the translation is tricky, we become enlightened by the myriad things. So I read that very carefully. And the character he uses, shinmitsu or shinsetsu, and it actually means have no gap. So we study the self to forget the self. That means we study what we are, and we no longer are sort of obsessed with the self. We enter into the larger self, the bigger self. So we don't no longer think life, we forget it in the usual way of thinking. When we do that, we can have no gap between us and the rest of the world, because it's only our thought that creates the gap. Shinsitsu or shimetsu also means intimacy, which is what I was just talking about. So when we are no longer obsessed with this little life and we allow ourselves to enter the big life that we are, intimacy with everything becomes possible. And Dogen said at one point, enlightenment is just intimacy with all things. Isn't that nice? Realization is just intimacy with all things. And intimacy doesn't mean like being close to someone, the way I am with my children or grandchildren. Shinsetsu or shimitsu means wholehearted oneness is one way to translate it. Being wholeheartedly one with things. So that when you see a stone or a cloud or a child, you're completely with them. And it's a way of returning to our real self. The other part is a quote that Suzuki-Roshi, who was the founder of Zen Center Los Angeles, translated Dogen. He said, "No creature ever falls short of its own completion. Wherever it stands, it does not fail to cover the ground." That's like that poem I wrote, "When was wholeness ever not whole?" Right? No creature is ever short of its own completion. No matter what has happened to us, no matter what our experiences, no matter what limitations we may feel, no matter what the conditions of our lives are, we are whole at every point. How could wholeness not be whole? And so Dogen's sense that we are whole doesn't begin at some point. We have always been whole. I have always been rain. You have always been sunshine. You have always been a cauliflower. I have always been a cloud. In other words, this life, which looks like all these individual lives that we're sitting here, there's just one big life here that we're living. And so that's what wholeness means. When we approach our life in that way, we experience everything quite differently. It's just self meeting self, big self meeting big self. And so we might tend to take care of things in a different way when we function that way. Kazuaki Tanahashi, who's the primary editor of that Dogen and teaching Shobo Genzo, he said very beautifully, I'll paraphrase it a little bit. An enlightened person, a person of great understanding, let's say, because enlightened is it's a terrible word. Everybody wants it like a new car or a Lexus or something. Did you get the new Lexus? Did you get enlightenment? Let's just say profound, authentic, and true understanding. A person of that understanding maintains that understanding while living according to the ordinary boundaries of daily life. So they bring that understanding to daily life, and it helps. Yeah, time? Okay.
So,
Andale.
We would love to open up questions to the audience, and there's a floor mic here that's available, and because we're recording and live streaming the event tonight, it would be great if you could step up to the microphone and ask your question.
I'm losing my microphone.
Ooh.
Yeah, please don't hesitate. Now that you know you can't lose time.
The reading in Chinese seemed to have a rhythm to it and perhaps even a rhyme.
Yes.
Is there a formal structure to those
Yes,
poems
there is.
in Chinese?
Yeah. In Chinese, it's rhyming every other line. Yeah, it's one of the reasons that I was so grateful Peggy read it, because we don't usually get to hear Chinese poetry from 1,200 years ago. But you can hear it. There's a very clear rhyme scheme. And you'll be interested to know that the way the characters were pronounced when Han Shan wrote those poems is different than the way, many of them, different than the way you heard tonight. They actually had slightly different sounds, different tonality.
So they weren't read tonight in medieval Chinese.
Well, Peggy was reading the original characters, but the pronunciation
was different. Yeah.
Right? So maybe I say neither, you say neither, right? Let's call the whole thing off. Yeah, it's very beautiful. Very, very beautiful. And you read it so beautifully, Peggy. Thank you. I keep losing this thing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Other questions from the audience?
Any comments, critiques?
Thank you so much for being here. This has been really wonderful. I have recently read about the idea of embracing distractions so that they cease to be distracting. I have an easily distractible mind, and focus is really difficult for me. And so in trying to do that, I find myself continually getting off track, because when I embrace the distraction, then I'm just running off with the distraction, and I completely leave behind whatever it was that I had intended to do. Can you speak to that? Because it was a meditation piece that I was reading.
Well, you could always try embracing non-distraction. So here's an interesting thing. How many people have distractible minds? Just raise your hand. Okay. Just so you know you're not alone. Right. Let's just be honest about this, okay? It's very easy to get distracted. It's important to understand several things. One is, who is it that doesn't want you to pay attention? And why is that in your best interests? That's one thing that's very important for us to ask. Who is it here who really doesn't want me to be present? Who does it serve for me not to be present? Maybe that's not my best friend. So if you ask that question, you might get an answer, and you can say, okay, that person doesn't have my best interests at heart. So maybe I'm not gonna call them up so much. And when they call, I'm polite. I'll listen for a second, and then I'm going to go back to what I do. So that rather than, as you say, if you find that embracing it just pulls you further and further and further away, you can be wise about the distraction. You can recognize that it's like noise coming through the wall from noisy neighbors. Because that's all it is, right? It's just noise. It has no seeming purpose at all. So if you ask, who wants me to pay attention to all that noise all the time? And you recognize that it's just noise, you can smile as soon as you hear it. As soon as the distraction begins, you say, oh, there's my old friend. Okay, good to see you. I have to do something now. This is what I do. When I sit down, if my mind is jumpy, as soon as I recognize it, I smile. Oh, what a sweet boy you are. Here you are trying to meditate. You've been meditating 50 years, and you still have this noisy neighbor. So I just smile at that sweet boy. And then I say, it's time to go back to my practice now. And when we return to our practice, this is the opposite of embracing distraction. When we return to our practice, we are sending a message deeply to our deepest self, the part that yearns to allow our wholeness to emerge, that says, I mean it. I really do want to know you. I'm really sincere about it. And then because it receives that from us, it starts to grow. And the distraction becomes less. It becomes less of a problem, more of just sort of, kind of little entertainment for a minute. And your practice grows so that the distraction no longer runs your life. I don't know what this teacher was suggesting with embracing distraction. I'm not saying push it away. I'm saying, treat it like a noisy neighbor. Just say, could you knock it off a little here? I'm trying to, write a poem.
So
That's my approach to it.
So this feels so very resonant with the part of your book, Fingerpainting on the Moon, with the chapter about sort of honoring the hungry ghost, or like the writing blockage that prevents you from being the creative person that you can be, and being able to sort of acknowledge that voice and sort of feed it or offer it something.
Yeah, good. There's in Buddhism, there's 6 realms of existence, and one of them is called hungry ghosts. And the hungry ghosts are beings who have huge bellies, enormous appetites, but throats the width of a needle. So no matter how often you feed them, they will never be full. Okay, you got it. Okay. Right. Very good. Now you know it's a hungry ghost, right? So in Zen practice, when we eat traditionally in our formal meals at the temple, we have a practice where we feed the hungry ghost. We take 1 grain of rice from the bowl that has the Buddha's food in it, and we put it somewhere. And we say, all unwholesome spirits, that's the hungry ghost, right? All unwholesome, or the part of the ego that doesn't want us to really get to know who and what we are. All unwholesome spirits, now I give you this offering. This food will pervade everywhere. 1 grain of rice, but it's the Buddha's food. It's from the Buddha's bowl. So that later in the day, when the hungry ghost shows up, we say, oh, good to see you. Yeah, I fed you today. And we go back to what we're doing. We don't give it more than a grain of rice. Because if we give it all the food, it's still going to be hungry. So it's nice. Nice to see you. Here's a grain of rice. Andale. Time for you to go. Yeah? Does that make sense?
I think we may have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Okay, please. Yeah.
So, first of all, thank you for this book. This is Fingerpainting on the Moon.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure.
This has been an amazing book for me to explore in a very kind of sacred writing practice, in a sense.
Thank you.
But what I'm left with that was probably most helpful about it, and I'm not even sure there's a question in this, but the sense of being equally drawn to and afraid of liberation.
Of liberation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whether it is through creative practice or sitting practice or just being in love with the world. And I'm kind of curious about if you have some thoughts about how synchronicity shows up in that intimacy with all things, whether it be in the writing practice. I found in this book that as I was reading it, things would come in from other sources that were reflecting exactly what you were saying, for instance. But this happens in life too, and I just wonder what sense you make of that.
I think when we open, we notice what's been going on all along. It's just there, right? Now you probably knew it before, but now you know that you are rain. Right? Are you raining right now? Yes, you're raining right now. Yeah, that's right. So it's just that when we open, we start to notice what's there. It's always going on. I mean, what we call time, for example, is a construct. It's a human construct. I mean, is there time? I mean, maybe there's one big moment in which it's all happening, but we just don't notice what's going on. But the earlier part of what you commented about being both attracted to and afraid of liberation, this is very important. So I would ask the same question that I ask this woman. Who is it that doesn't want you to be free? So let's ask the first question. Do you want to be free?
Yes.
Oh, who doesn't want to be free? Right. So you can ask that question. Who is it that's threatened by being free? So here's what happens. A part of our ego that's not integrated, call it ego, okay? A part of that our personality that is not integrated knows, oh, if she keeps writing poetry, she is going to pay attention to the poetry and not to me. So they hire a hungry ghost. And they call the hungry ghost agency. And they say, okay, we need you quickly because this woman's in trouble. She's almost getting free. And they send the hungry ghost over to you. And the hungry ghost does this. You're writing a poem. It's the most important poem you've ever written in your life. You're about to really say something that you've been waiting to say your whole life. And all of a sudden you write, the daisies are so pretty by the window. That's the hungry ghost who's taken over your poem. And all of a sudden you're writing about daisies and you forgot all about the thing you really needed to say and the thing you really needed to write about. In Zen practice, what's very common is that people get quieter and quieter and quieter. They reach a place sometimes called samadhi, which is very spacious and still and light, and they back off. Same process. It's exactly the same process. So rather than follow the backing off, we recognize it for what is. Thank you, hungry ghost. I'm here now because I mean it. Because I really do want to be fully and wholly myself and discover what that is. So we have a way to do it. And what you call synchronicity, I like to call good old-fashioned coincidence. And the reason is that synchronicity, chronos, is time. It has nothing to do with time. Coincidence means things happening at this, right? Coincidence, things happening together. And that is how the world functions. Forget time. Things are always happening together. So it's a different emphasis. But the Jungians have made a lot of money on synchronicity. And I know that because I used to teach at the Jung Institute. Okay, one more or no?
I want to be mindful of time. Kristen, you think time? One more?
One more,
Okay.
and
If
I'll
you could
try
be
to be
as concise
short.
as possible.
Please.
I think what you were just talking about was what a physicist would call quantum mind. Quantum mind, things happening at the same time.
Thank you.
At the beginning of your talk, you said, in a terrible time,
Yes.
no one is innocent.
Yes.
And this is
A terrible
a
time.
terrible time.
It certainly is.
We have to go back to the 1930s almost to see this. And the denial that goes on. I've been trying to move out of the United States for several years now. I saw this coming. It didn't come out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
And
Certainly
it's
not.
very, very hard to find any space or distance when literally a hell realm is appearing, right in our midst. And that kind of mass delusion,
Mm-hmm.
and it just makes any kind of practice so much harder, for me anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what I wanted to say.
Mm-hmm. The next line in that poem is, no one is innocent in a terrible time. Every voice given comes with a demand. That's my firm conviction. It may be a terrible time, but we're up to it. And in my view, speaking for myself, but maybe for others, I have an obligation to life, to act on behalf of life. Because life wants to live. Life doesn't want to die. It wants to live. The children want to live. Women want to be able to walk molested, unbothered. Non-white, so-called people of color, they want to have equal access to everything. We know that. So because we know that we are life, our voice naturally wants to speak up. And if we don't, we can ask, who doesn't want me to speak? And what does it serve for me not to speak? It's a very important point.
Well,
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, yeah.
For
Can I add one last thing? I remember Martin Luther King saying that when you're dealing with obstacles of which the people involved have some conscience, you follow Gandhi. When you're dealing with someone or some institution that doesn't, you follow Bonhoeffer. And I think people have to recognize that. That's all.
Yeah. Let me just end with this then. My daughter is famous in our house for when she was young getting kind of words of songs and things mixed up. Do you remember the play or movie Grease? And there was a song, Hopelessly Devoted to You. So when my daughter was 7, I came home and I saw her lying on her back with her leg over one arm, and she was singing at the top of her lungs, Hopelessly Demoted to You. And another thing she said to me once was, Dad, that's an obstacle delusion. Which made me understand my whole life. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being with us here tonight in Seattle. Thank you all for coming and listening and being a part of this dialogue.
If people want me...